Empathy is like pure gold. I know the concept empathy may not sound particularly exciting, but it is priceless. It's priceless in human relationships, and it has a place in politics. For a moment, I want you to think of empathy in a very personal way. Think of your dearest friend or your dearest friends. The quality we often most value in our friendships is the capacity of our friend to feel with us, to be able to place themselves in our shoes, to get alongside us and feel the things that we feel. They don't have to solve the problems. They don't have to come up with answers, but they feel with us. And that companionship of feeling, that companionship of being makes all the difference. And what I want to suggest today is that the quality of empathy has an important role in our politics and in the world in which we live. At the moment, the world is dominated by strongman politics. You know, the strongman in the United States, Vladimir Putin in Russia is a strong man. Xi Jinping in China is a strong man. And during the pandemic, when all of us are a bit rattled and anxious, it is only natural that we want strong leadership. We want leaders who can make the hard decisions about quarantine and about vaccines and about borders. But if there is no empathy, if empathy is absent, then that strength can crush the life out of communities and out of people. There's a really important place in human relationships and in the world in which we live for that quality of empathy. So in order to unpack it, we're going to go on a little theological exploration about the value and the quality of empathy. And we'll look at the kind of history, if you like, of the divine within the life of the church. What I want to suggest is that Christianity is at its best when it is empathic. And the great religions of the world are usually also at their best when the empathic is expressed and valued. Now, the early church in the first century, its understanding of the divine was very much empathic. But by the second, third and fourth centuries, we lost that sense of empathy. And it happened in two stages. The first stage was in the second century as the church became Hellenized. That is, it became more Greek in practice, in thinking, and in philosophy. And in Greek thinking, Greek philosophical thinking, the divine was understood as perfect. And that perfection was characterized by a kind of divine indifference. That is, the divine does not suffer like we do, is impervious to the whims of the world, does not feel with us. This God is like the Clint Eastwood of the ancient world. You know, remember the Dirty Harry movies that Clint was immovable, incapable of expressing. He expressed a kind of crude form of stoicism, and we described it as cool. So in the second century, there was a shift from very much the Jewish understanding of the divine to a Greek understanding, in which the perfection of the divine was characterized by this sense of indifference, that this God was unmoved, not subject to the whims and the changes and as we know it. Now, of course, a century or two later, under the takeover of Rome, as the church became corporatized, as the church began to emulate the micromanagement techniques of Rome, this formed a toxic combination theologically and pastorally. By the 3rd and 4th centuries, we have this sense of the divine as perfect, as immune from human feelings, as indifferent, as cool, impassioned, not touched by the things that we feel. And then a whole system from bishops down was organised under this notion of perfection. Moving along throughout the centuries, we can see the diabolical consequences of this. A church that becomes caught up in institutional structures of modelling a kind of perfection that none of us can replicate, but we punish ourselves if we fail to live up to these levels of perfection. So let's go way back. Let's go back beyond the corporatization, the Roman corporatization of the church. Let's go back beyond the kind of the Greek indifference, the God who is indifferent, the God who is not moved, and go back to the 1st century. And this is a critical insight into the nature of both the Jewish and the Christian understanding of God. This divine presence feels with us. The divine in the Jewish and Christian traditions is moved by our suffering, suffers with us, rejoices with us. If we to make any sense of the Christian notion of the ministry of Jesus and his crucifixion, it is not about some indifferent God demanding a ransom or demanding that his honour be met, but about the God who feels. And Jesus himself embodies this empathic understanding of the divine. Time and time again in relationships, Jesus feels with others. Jesus is moved to tears. Jesus sits with those who are suffering. Jesus enjoys meals with the ordinary and with the marginalised. In other words, the words and deeds of Jesus express in a most poignant and passionate way this sense of divine empathy, a divine empathy of feeling with others that is lived out in everything that he says and does. So let's explore then this sense of empathy. Let's give praise to this sense of empathy. Let's see this empathy as a divine quality, which all of us have the potential to embody and express. Let's ground this notion of empathic in our own experience and in relationships. Go back to the original illustration of the friend that we really cherish. You know, you're going through a crisis, in the middle of a divorce, illness, retrenchment, unemployment. You're experiencing COVID-19. Your life is absolute mess. The friend who stands out is not the one with the answers, not the one with the cliches or the biblical texts or the pious sayings. The friend who stands out is the one who sits beside us, who feels with us. So without offering a solution or even a clever word of advice or a pithy saying, the presence of the friend who sits with us, who sits beside us, who feels with us, who embodies and expresses empathy, is a balm. It is a healing balm. We live in a world at the moment under the pandemic racked by fear. And there are good reasons for feeling fearful about the pandemic. And we want strong leadership. But that strong leadership needs to be tempered by a sense of the humane and by the value of empathy. In other words, we hope that each country and each state can be a good manager of its people, but with heart, with a feeling. I mean, this is a classic reason why we need more women and gay politicians. It's not that they monopolise empathy, but they're not afraid to use it. And some of the great leaders of the world, I'm thinking now of Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, are able to express this sense of empathy, which is balanced with wise and shrewd leadership. Once we foster this sense of empathy in our communities, in our families, apart from everything else, it's infectious, but it changes the way we deal things. When we operate out of empathy, we instinctively place a value on the other person. In other words, the other person isn't a problem to be solved, but someone to be considered. Empathy changes the way we deal with our friends. Empathy changes the way we deal with each other in our communities. Now, in the panic of the pandemic, what is becoming obvious is that there are many countries and communities, because of overpopulation, because of poverty, historic poverty, they do not have not only appropriate access to vaccines, but also they don't have the same level of health care as is experienced in many Western countries. If we look closer to home and look at the situation in Australia at the moment, where we've had good management of our borders, presently as I speak, there are 9,000 Australians in India who are in dire straits. If we work on the basis of empathy, in addition to wise management, that is, if we see empathy as equally as important as shrewd and strong leadership, that we include empathy in the repertoire of political leadership, then it changes our attitude towards the nation of India and also those 9,000 Australians there. In other words, instead of seeing them as part of a problem or as problems in themselves, we start to factor in the value of these people and the value of this country into our consideration. We go the extra mile. Presently, Australia is making some good management decisions, but because of the culture of fear and uncertainty, we're reluctant to go the extra mile. When we are empathic, when we express the gift of divine empathy, when we allow it to infuse our politics, we go the extra mile. We not only make sensible decisions on the basis of medical advice, but on the basis of compassion, we take extra steps and extra risks to help all our friends in the nation of India, and especially those 9,000 Australians are there. Think once again of the friend that you really value, the friend that you cherish. And I can guarantee that friend has a capacity, along with humour and love and laughter, to express empathy. Empathy makes all the difference in a friendship. And God knows we need some empathy in our politics at this time. So that for the sake of the others, we look at our values, we value the other person and we value other communities, and we go the extra mile in the name of love and with great, deep and infinite empathy, divine empathy. In the name of God, Creator, Redeemer and Sustainer. Amen.